So just to clarify, just to make sure I'm perfectly clear on three things. When you speak to a patient, a motivated patient, and they're asking you for your very best advice, what exactly are you saying to them regarding salt, 1, oil, 2, meaning hemp, flax, olive, chia, and 3, if you say no to the oil, what are you saying to them specifically about raw nuts, raw seeds, avocados, and olives? So first salt, second oil, third, assuming you said no to the oil, what are you saying about raw seeds, raw nuts, avocados, and olives? So those three things, just to be clear of what you're saying.
So we don't use any added salt, oil, or sugar in the diet. We don't believe that salt, oil, and sugar are actually food. They're hyper-concentrated food byproducts that have been processed out and reintroduced to stimulate dopamine production in the brain and lead to the pleasure trap. So we advocate a whole plant food diet that is naturally high in complex carbohydrates, has adequate quantities of sodium in the diet, has all the protein, including the essential amino acids that you need, and has the essential fats that are necessary without the use of any fractionated food. So that's why we talk about a vegan SOS-free diet.
And what about the nuts, seeds, avocados, and olives?
Because these foods are naturally very rich, particularly for people looking to control weight and or pathology, we'll recommend they limit the amount of whole plant food that are rich in fats. For example, nuts and seeds, we're typically guiding people to use 1 ounce a day or so of these kind of products. Things like avocado, we would recommend that they might limit themselves to 1/2 an avocado a day, because we don't want the diet to be excessively high in fat. These diets with moderate amounts of these rich foods will have around 15 to 18% of calories from fat. And clinically, that's what we've seen that works best in helping people with established pathology or excess weight lose their excess weight and reverse their pathology.
As one who spent 8 years on the staff at True North, I'm of course going to agree with the vast majority of what you just heard. I'm not a big oil fan. The oils get into the walls of the blood vessels and stiffen them. They inhibit insulin production. I'm not a big oil fan and recommend against their use. Stir fry in water or vegetable broth, something else that's wet, that's not oily. Do nuts and seeds have fatty foods have a place in diet? Yes, I certainly think they do. They provide not only fats, especially walnuts, flax seeds, chia seeds, etc., but especially of the omega-3 variety, as well as lignans and fat-soluble vitamins. So a small handful, 1 ounce, 2 ounces at the most, of course, walnuts on your oatmeal, I think is perfectly fine, and a quarter of an avocado on your hummus sandwich, I think is fine. You have to get your fats somewhere, get them out of whole foods, not out of glass bottles. So I'm okay with small amounts of fats in their natural form. Salt, I'm a recovering saltaholic. I used to I use a lot of it. I've found other ways to entertain my tongue with lemon juice and non-salty substitutes that we can make at home in a grinder here, or Benson's Table Tasty. There are some people, they tend to be young or middle-aged women, very lean, the 98-pound women who have low, their blood pressure on a good day is 80/60. They run low blood pressures and they can get lightheaded easily. Those folks benefit from a little extra salt on their food. I have no problem with that. And if literally a pinch, 1/8 of a teaspoon on your veggies or whatever increases the enjoyment of the veggies, and you don't have high blood pressure or anything like that, I'm okay with just a tiny amount just for flavoring there. But avoid those processed foods that already are loaded up with salt. That's where we really get a problem. But a small amount added to the table is acceptable to me. So salt, fat, and oils. So that's where I stand on those.
Thank you.
I'd like to add a comment on the oil question, because for some reason, in general conversation about added oil, I think is missing something. Basically, added oil, as we know, is liquid. It's from plants, and it's mostly polyunsaturates. And polyunsaturates, historically, for a long time, have been considered the good fats, right? Well, it turns out that when the oil is in the plant itself, it has a different kind of effect, different kind of function than when it's isolated. In the plant, the polyunsaturated oils are participating in the production of free radicals, for example, but very controlled, which is beneficial for treating some of the illnesses we might have or the inflammation when it's in the plant. The moment we take it out, the polyunsaturates, then they're subject to oxidation, obviously, a lot of free radical production, and they're really quite toxic. And so in contrast, the saturated fats, which we always have labeled bad fats because they're primarily associated with animal food. On the other hand, surprisingly, they are not reactive, when you take them out of the food. So I think we need to make this distinction, on this point about saturated versus unsaturated. I don't consider unsaturated fats bad necessarily when they're part of plants. When you put them out and put them in a bottle, it's a different story. And the vice versa for saturated fats. So that's something we tend not to pay too much attention to.
Thank you.
And I'll add my 2 cents worth. I agree that oils are best coming from whole foods. When they come from whole foods, they're packaged with fiber and phytochemicals and antioxidants and prebiotics for sure. And these are all of benefit. When you extract them from a food, you lose most of the nutrients that that food provides. However, that having been said, again, if you look at the blue zones, there are some blue zones that use a fair bit of oil and still maintain good health. But the bulk of their diet is still whole plant foods. They're not eating a lot of highly processed foods. I was amazed when I went to Spain and I was giving a lecture there at a nutrition conference, and I was just shocked at how the food was so soaked in olive oil. It was just dripping in olive oil. And yet a lot of the people were lean and had beautiful skin and hair. And so it was just interesting to see. But I think for most people in North America, 70% of whom will die of a diet-induced disease, adding oil to the diet is just adding calories with no nutrition. They need to increase nutrient density, not decrease it. So generally, we really want to minimize intake. In terms of salt, I guess I tend to be a little more liberal, saying, keep sodium under about 1,500 milligrams. For some people, it's better to go even lower, but I have seen individuals, Dr. Klaper mentioned, women who are especially very, very thin with very low blood sugar or with low blood pressure, But I've also seen athletes who sweat a lot, who they're not your standard American eater or exerciser, and they need a little more sodium because they're sweating so much. So I think it really depends on the individuals. Humans really probably need about 500 milligrams per day or even less, unless they're sweating a lot for most people. So most of us would do well with a lot less salt. If you think about, the average American intake being 3,400 milligrams or so a day, and the average man about 4,000, and 75% of that salt's coming from processed foods. But it's just way too much. We need to be eating a lot less.
We consistently see patients, though, that are on vegan diets that have made attempts to be healthy, but they're more flexible on the sodium, because many of the leaders in the vegan movement are much more flexible about sodium, and some have actually been almost proponents of it. And you take those patients and you put them on a whole plant food SOS-free diet, and their persistent hypertension normalizes, their persistent joint pain eases, some of the digestive difficulties and microbiome related problems correct. So I would agree, some people are more sensitive than others. And some people, might have to be particularly diligent in order to avoid problems. But I think everybody's better off served, just like you don't need to add refined carbohydrates to get enough carbohydrate. You don't need to add oil to get enough fat. You do not need to add salt to get refined salt to get enough sodium. What you might do, just like we do with food, is add more particularly sodium-rich foods in the diet, all your steamed greens and all the foods that are so naturally high in sodium to meet any purported needs or increased needs. I would venture, though, that the athletes need more sodium to the proportional needs of their increased caloric intake. So if they're getting all of their calories from whole plant foods, they're going to get the sodium they need no matter how much they're sweating. The problem is that many athletes, like many people, are eating a significant percentage of their calories from refined foods. So they're not getting all their calories and their increased calories because of their increased activity. And therefore, they don't get enough of the micronutrient density that they might need.
Okay, Brian Clement has said many times that the fruit has been bred to be bigger and sweeter than it would be in nature, that 200 years ago, the grape was wild, it had a seed in it, it was tart, it was only available 3 weeks a year, and now you can get a Fuji apple that's super sweet, that was made in a laboratory or a university to be bred to be sweeter. And he's saying that it feeds yeast, mold, fungus, candida, and cancer. And he's saying that Professor Thomas Seyfried from Boston College says that cancer's fuel is glucose and glutamine, and to starve cancer, you want to avoid glucose, and glutamine's hard to starve, but do this best as possible. And I've asked Brian this 100 times because I don't want anyone messing with fruit because it's one of the greatest joys in the world. So it doesn't intuitively feel good to me to say that I should be avoiding blueberries, but he's insistent that this somehow is feeding yeast, mold, fungus, candida, and cancer, and those all scare me. So what is your thought on what Brian is saying about fruit?
I mean, it's true that whole fruits today have been hybridized. They are higher in sugar, lower in minerals. If you go to Hawaii and look at the wild apples, they look more like vegetables today. And it's also true that some people, because of their existing pathology, have problems processing glucose efficiently. And for those people, will limit their fruit to whole fruit only and perhaps limit the quantity. There are some fruits like berries and melons that tend to be a lower glycemic response than others. And you may manipulate the diet of individual patients to accommodate their current pathology. But the bottom line is just get enough vegetables in the diet, both raw and cooked, that you can neutralize whatever negative effects there might be from a higher sugar balanced fruit. And for the vast majority of people, they're going to do fine. If you're clinically intervening for a specific therapeutic end game, that's a different story. But for most people, whole plant foods, including whole fruits, are going to be well served, well tolerated, even in diabetics, although you may have to limit the quantity, the proportion of calories that come from the simpler sugars for people that have existing pathology.
And I'll just add, I've done a number of searches on PubMed to try to find studies that suggest fruit has detrimental effects on health, and I can't find any. There was I think it was 2018 comprehensive review on fruit and health, and it had over 350 references, and their conclusion was fruit provides health benefits by protecting gastrointestinal health, improving the microbiome, reducing inflammatory diseases, diverticular disease, promoting long-term weight management, reducing risk of heart disease and diabetes and metabolic syndrome and cancers, and improving the odds of aging successfully, and reducing asthma and chronic obstructive pulmonary diseases, and so on and so on and so on. I just couldn't find a single study that supported the idea that fruit is dangerous to health.